On February 20th, 43, north of Kasserine Pass in Tunisia, the German battle report failed to capture the full shock experienced by their tank commanders that morning. The American Sherman tanks were performing movements that seemed to defy everything the Wehrmacht had ever trained for. Without any visible signals, they coordinated as if they shared one mind. Through the dust and smoke of the North African battlefield, 5 Shermans, separated by hills and uneven ground, advanced on German positions with flawless timing. There were no flags, no flares, no messengers darting between vehicles. Yet every tank moved with purpose, covering the other's blind spots and reacting as if connected by an unseen force. Inside the German Panzer IVs, commanders struggled to make sense of what was happening. Their FUG-5 radios were filled with static and interference. The 10-watt transmitters, once considered top technology in the 1930s, had limited range barely a few hundred meters when the tanks were moving. Many German tanks could only receive orders. They couldn't send reports or call for backup. To the Germans, the American coordination looked supernatural. What they didn't know was that the Americans had brought something entirely new to the battlefield frequency modulation radios, FM radios, installed in every Sherman tank. These systems were precise, stable, and powerful, broadcasting with 25 watts of transmission strength. The voices of commanders came through clearly, cutting through the roar of engines and explosions. Across the world, far from Detroit's assembly lines, a new kind of advantage was being revealed, not one of armor or firepower, but of communication. The invisible network connecting American tank crews gave them a level of coordination the German army couldn't imagine. This transformation had started long before that day. On July 22, 1941, the U.S. Army standardized a series of radio sets, the SCR-508, SCR-528, and SCR-538 for all medium tanks. At that same time, while German forces advanced through the Soviet Union using outdated communication methods, American engineers were quietly perfecting something revolutionary. At the Galvin Manufacturing Company, which would later become Motorola, engineers Daniel E. Noble and Henryk Magnuski led the development of FM systems built for war conditions. Noble envisioned the military use of FM technology, while Magnuski overcame the immense challenges of fitting advanced electronics into tanks that rumbled across deserts and battlefields. The final design weighed 181 pounds, but its impact was immense. It turned every Sherman tank into part of the first true battlefield communication network in history. The heart of this system was the BC-604 transmitter. It produced 25 watts of power, 2.5 times stronger than the German FUG-5. It operated between 20 and 27.9 MHz, offering 10 preset channels with crystal-controlled precision. Commanders could use dual BC-603 receivers to listen to multiple channels at once, allowing real-time coordination between platoons. But the real revolution was not in the hardware alone. It was in the technology of frequency modulation itself. Developed by Edwin Armstrong and licensed to the U.S. military, FM eliminated the static and noise that crippled traditional amplitude modulation systems. While German tank crews struggled with interference every time artillery shells exploded, American crews heard clear commands and updates. In the chaos of North Africa, that difference meant everything. It turned confusion into coordination, isolation into unity. The Germans never realized that one of the most decisive advantages of the war was not visible at all. It was hidden in the airwaves, the invisible link that made the Sherman tank far more than a machine of steel and fire. It was a moving network of human voices, connected through technology that redefined modern warfare. On November 8, 1942, Operation Torch brought American tanks into the deserts of North Africa. The 2nd Armored Division landed near the ports of Safi and Fadala, bringing with them a new advantage that would soon reshape armored warfare, the SCR-508 radio. In the weeks that followed, these American radios would reveal just how far communication technology had advanced beyond what the Germans were using. The Afrika Korps, the most seasoned armored formation of the Wehrmacht, entered battle under significant communication limitations. A standard German tank platoon of 5 vehicles had only 1 or 2 tanks equipped with Fuji 5 transceivers capable of both sending and receiving messages. The rest carried the simpler Fug 2 receivers. These could only listen, not reply or report. Orders came one way, from the platoon leader down, and obedience was shown through movement rather than words. When a command tank was destroyed, often targeted first because its extra antennas gave it away, the entire unit lost cohesion. Against American forces, where every single tank could issue orders and coordinate freely, this weakness would prove devastating. The Battle of Kasserine Pass, fought between February 14th and 24th, 943, became the first major test of this difference. While the battle was technically a German victory, it exposed a new kind of capability that left German observers deeply unsettled. In the confusion of combat, elements of the U.S. 1st Armored Division remained connected across 50 miles of chaotic battlefield. Tank crews who had never met one another coordinated flanking maneuvers, issued warnings about ambushes, and called for artillery support, all with the clarity of an in-person conversation. German intelligence units monitoring the radio traffic were astonished. Reports from the 10th Panzer Division's signal section noted that American transmissions were sharp and stable, even at distances where German radios dissolved into noise. The most alarming discovery came later. Every American tank had a fully functional transmitter. In the German army, such capability was reserved only for platoon leaders and command tanks. The Fuji 5 radios used by German tanks operated on amplitude modulation within the 27 to 33 3 MHz range. On paper, this system seemed adequate. In practice, it was fragile and unreliable. The 10-watt transmitter could barely maintain clear contact over 2 or 3 kilometers, and when tanks were moving, that range often dropped to a few hundred meters. The constant mechanical noise of engines, spark plugs, and metal treads overwhelmed AM systems, turning crucial battlefield communication into bursts of static. In contrast, American FM radios filtered out interference and delivered speech that was remarkably clear, even in combat conditions. In September 1940, American forces brought their tanks to Italy. The mountainous terrain there was expected to limit the range of any radio system. Yet the opposite occurred. The U.S. Army's FM radios, using frequency modulation, thrived in conditions that crippled German communications. The SCR-508 could manage reflections and distortions caused by cliffs and valleys far better than amplitude-based systems. American tank units coordinated through fog, forests, and rugged hills where even visual contact was impossible. During the advance toward Cassino, armored platoons maneuvered across ridgelines with near-perfect timing. German commanders could not understand how these movements were possible without visual signals. Reports from the 1st Armored Division recorded instances of coordination at distances where German radio operators heard nothing but static. By June 6, 1944, when the first Sherman tanks rumbled off the landing craft onto the beaches of Normandy, the SCR-508 radio had become a trusted weapon of its own. American crews maintained steady communication with naval artillery offshore, guiding fire with precision that no German unit could match. Yet, amid the hedgerows of Normandy, A new problem appeared. The tank's radios operated between 24 and 27.9 megahertz, while infantry radios, such as the SCR 300, used a higher band between 40 and 48 megahertz. These systems could not talk to one another. In the thick bocage countryside, this gap in communication proved deadly. American infantry often watched helplessly as enemy soldiers with Panzerfaust launchers crept close to Sherman tanks. Unable to warn the crews in time, it was a painful lesson in the importance of interoperability, one that would later drive the development of unified battlefield radio systems. American innovation solved the problem in a matter of weeks. Tank crews began attaching EE-8 field telephones inside ammunition boxes, welded to the outside of their vehicles and connected directly to the internal communication system. This allowed nearby infantry to speak with the crew without relying on incompatible radios. By the time Operation Cobra began in late July 1940. This seemingly simple idea had transformed battlefield coordination between tanks and infantry. Soldiers on foot could now communicate instantly with tank commanders, directing fire and movements in real time. It was a practical, low-cost innovation that saved countless lives and gave American forces a decisive advantage in one of the most critical operations of the Western Front. From July 25th to 30th, 1944, Operation Cobra revealed the full power of American communication technology. Under the command of Major General Edward H. Brooks, the 2nd Armored Division orchestrated the movements of more than 200 Sherman tanks through an interconnected web of radio networks. What emerged was a new level of battlefield control, fast, responsive, and remarkably coordinated. For the German defenders of the Panzer Division, it was as if their enemy could see everything at once. American tank units reacted instantly to calls for assistance, sometimes from other formations miles away. Artillery fire, directed through tank radios, struck targets within minutes of being reported. The contrast with German communication was stark and devastating. Once celebrated as one of Germany's elite armored formations, Panzer Lehr now fought in near silence. Most of its tanks had no functioning radios and depended on visual signals, hand gestures, flags, and flares, methods that were useless in the dense hedgerows of Normandy. Those few tanks that retained radio contact faced static, signal loss, and range limitations so severe that coordinated maneuvers were nearly impossible. The irony was striking. Germany had once led the world in the use of radios in armored warfare. As early as the 1920s, General Heinz Guderian, the visionary behind the Blitzkrieg Doctrine, had argued that no tank unit could succeed without real-time communication. In his 1937 book, Achtung, Panzer, he wrote that effective radio coordination was the heart of modern mechanized warfare. Guderian's ideas had powered Germany's early victories in Poland and France, where synchronized tank assaults overwhelmed slower, less coordinated enemies. Yet by 1943, the situation had reversed. German industry could no longer produce the radios needed to fulfill Guderian's own doctrine. Production statistics told a grim story. In 1943, German factories built approximately 700 medium tanks, but fewer than 2,000 Fugue transceivers. Even among those, many were reserved for command tanks and self-propelled guns, leaving the majority of frontline vehicles without communication capability. The Wehrmacht's once revolutionary advantage had vanished. Soviet forces faced an even greater communication crisis. The T-34, one of the most iconic tanks of World War II, was often produced without any radio equipment at all. In the early years of the German invasion, Soviet armored units relied on prearranged plans and flag signals during combat. Against fast-moving German formations, This approach proved disastrous. By 943, Lend-Lease aid from the United States began to change that. American-made radios, including the SCR-508, were supplied for Soviet command tanks, bringing at least partial relief. But even by the end of the war, only about a quarter of Soviet tanks carried radios. The rest still depended on visual coordination or guesswork under fire. The difference underscored a larger truth about the war's industrial and technological divide. Where the Soviet Union struggled to equip 1 in 4 tanks with basic communication systems, the United States had succeeded in fitting every single tank with an advanced frequency modulation radio network. This was more than a logistical achievement. It was a reflection of an entire nation's capacity to adapt, innovate, and mobilize. At the center of this transformation stood Motorola's factory in Chicago. Before the war, the company had produced consumer car radios. Converting to military production required a complete redesign of its assembly lines and a mastery of new engineering standards. Each SCR-508 radio set was a masterpiece of precision manufacturing, composed of 748 individual components that had to perform flawlessly in extreme battlefield conditions. The BC-604 transmitter alone contained 474 capacitors and 385 resistors, while the crystal oscillators were engineered to maintain stable frequencies despite temperature changes, vibration, and shock. These were not ordinary radios. They were technological marvels built for the harshest environments on Earth. Every unit produced in that Chicago plant represented the industrial strength of the United States at its wartime peak, where engineering, manufacturing, and innovation converged to create tools that turned the tide of battle. 1942-3. 800 SCR-508 family radios. 1943-11. 400 units. To 1944-24. 1,000 units. Total wartime production was over 50,000 tank radio sets. This production miracle ensured that all 324 Sherman tanks manufactured during the war received sophisticated radio equipment, an achievement no other nation approached. The SCR-508 offered far more than just frequency modulation. Its crystal-controlled stability meant American tank crews could preset radio channels before battle and rely on them to remain stable under the harshest conditions. In contrast, German Fuji-5 radios depended on manual tuning through variable capacitors, which often drifted off frequency during movement or heavy fire. This forced German crews to constantly adjust settings, losing precious seconds in combat. The American system allowed seamless communication. Commanders could switch instantly between networks, giving and receiving orders without interruption. The dual receiver configuration of the SCR-508 let tank commanders monitor both the platoon and company command networks at the same time. Orders could be issued instantly while commanders stayed informed of changing frontline conditions. Inside the tank, the BC-606 intercom system connected every crew member directly to the commander. This meant that the gunner, loader, and driver could warn of threats the instant they appeared. Throat microphones and noise-canceling headsets allowed communication even as the tank roared into combat. In contrast, many German tanks lacked internal communication systems altogether, leaving their crews to rely on physical taps or shouts to pass messages through the deafening noise of battle. Power management was another area where American design outperformed its German counterpart. The SCR-508 could operate on either 12 or 24 volts and automatically adjusted to the tank's available power. Its built-in dynamotor provided a filtered, stable current that eliminated interference from the vehicle's electrical system. German radios, by comparison, were powered directly from the engine circuits, meaning every ignition spark or motor surge produced a burst of static. In combat, that interference often rendered communication nearly useless when it was needed most. The universal use of advanced radios revolutionized American armored doctrine. The flexible combat command structure, known as task forces, was built entirely on the reliability of these communication systems. Instead of being limited to fixed formations, American commanders could assemble mixed groups of tanks, infantry, engineers, and artillery units for specific missions. Because all vehicles shared compatible radios, coordination was immediate and precise. This adaptability stunned German commanders, whose own armies depended on rigid hierarchies and pre-planned tactics due to their communication shortcomings. The Americans could reorganize in real time, responding to changing battlefield conditions faster than the enemy could react. One of the clearest demonstrations of this came during the Battle of Aracourt in September 1944. The U.S. 4th Armored Division faced several German panzer brigades equipped with the formidable Panther tanks vehicles that outgunned and out-armored the American Shermans in nearly every technical aspect. But what the Americans lacked in firepower, they made up for in coordination. Every Sherman tank could report enemy movements the moment they were spotted. Tank destroyer units received real-time targeting information from tanks beyond their line of sight. Artillery observers positioned in Sherman command tanks called in devastating barrages with extraordinary speed and accuracy. Over 3 weeks of fighting, the 4th Armored Division destroyed 281 German armored vehicles while losing only 41 of their own. A 7-to-1 kill ratio was achieved not through superior armor or weaponry, but through unmatched communication and coordination. Throughout the war, German intelligence never fully recognized the source of this American advantage. Field reports often described some armored units as unusually well coordinated, but the explanations pointed to training and discipline rather than technology. A captured German intelligence document from September 1944 stated, "American tank units demonstrate good radio discipline and coordination. This appears to result from extensive training and rigid communication procedures." The report completely overlooked the technical foundation behind that discipline. German commanders continued to plan their tactics under outdated assumptions. They still believed that only command tanks possessed full radio capabilities and directed their fire accordingly, unaware that every Sherman in the formation could transmit and receive orders. They also believed that separating American tanks would lead to confusion, not realizing that radio networks allowed those same tanks to maintain perfect coordination even when out of visual range. This misunderstanding persisted until the end of the war, as the Wehrmacht never grasped that the invisible lines of communication between American tanks were as decisive as any weapon on the battlefield. In March 1945, as American forces advanced toward the Rhine River, their mastery of battlefield communication reached its peak. The dramatic capture of the Remagen Bridge illustrated how rapidly American command networks could act. When units of the 9th Armored Division found the Ludendorff Bridge still standing, their discovery was transmitted by radio to 1st Army headquarters within minutes. Within an hour, multiple divisions were repositioning to exploit the opportunity. German forces, still dependent on landline telephones that had been systematically destroyed by Allied airstrikes, could not react with comparable speed. The result was overwhelming. American tank platoons from separate battalions coordinated through radio channels to form a seamless defense around the bridgehead. Their rapid response created a unified front that German counterattacks, hampered by fragmented communication, could not penetrate. Lacking coordination, German units attacked piecemeal and were destroyed one by one. By April 1944, American communication dominance was complete. The encirclement of the Ruhr pocket marked the culmination of this advantage. Using radio coordination, armored columns from the U.S. First and Ninth Armies executed a complex double envelopment with precision that astonished even their commanders. Inside the Ruhr, 325,000 German troops were trapped, not only by enemy movement, but by their own communication collapse. American fighter bombers, directed by radio-equipped forward air controllers, systematically eliminated German command centers and relay stations. Soon, Wehrmacht units were cut off from one another and from higher headquarters. The last messages transmitted by Field Marshal Walter Model captured the scale of the disaster. No contact with adjacent units. No communication with higher headquarters. Fighting continues, but coordination impossible. It was the final acknowledgement that the Wehrmacht's tactical skill could not overcome the loss of operational coherence. Beyond the tactical and strategic dimensions, radio communication shaped the psychological experience of war itself. American tank crews fought with the assurance that they were never truly alone. Even when separated by smoke, distance, or darkness, they remained connected by invisible radio links that carried orders, warnings, and encouragement. This sense of connection strengthened morale and cohesion in ways that are difficult to quantify but deeply felt in combat. German tank crews, on the other hand, often faced the opposite reality, isolated and unable to communicate beyond line of sight. They fought individual battles within larger engagements, unaware of the broader situation. Otto Carius, one of Germany's most experienced tank commanders, described in his memoir Tigers in the Mud the chaos and danger of operating with limited communication. Although he emphasized tactics and battlefield skill, his accounts reflected the deep isolation German crews endured compared to their American counterparts. The strategic consequences of American radio superiority extended far beyond individual battles. The rapid pace of American offensives in 1944 and 1945 depended as much on communication as on mobility or firepower. The Third Army's famous drive across France under General George S. Patton relied on extensive radio networks that kept units coordinated over hundreds of miles. Orders, reports, and requests for air or artillery support moved instantly across the front. German commanders repeatedly misjudged American operational tempo because they could not imagine that such rapid communication was technologically possible. Heinz Guderian, serving as Inspector General of Armored Troops, understood the problem but lacked the industrial means to address it. In a memorandum from December 1944, he admitted that American coordination effectively neutralized the advantages of German tank design and firepower. After Germany's surrender, American technical intelligence teams conducted thorough evaluations of captured German equipment. Their findings confirmed what soldiers in the field already knew. German tanks often featured thicker armor and more powerful guns, but their communication systems were far behind. U.S. Army Technical Intelligence Report number 176 summarized the issue plainly. German tank communications equipment was approximately 5 years behind American systems. The lack of frequency modulation, combined with the limited number of installed radios and poor electrical shielding, created fatal weaknesses in coordination and command. Soviet engineers reached similar conclusions. When the Red Army examined captured German tanks, they too recognized the superiority of American radio technology. In the years following the war, Soviet designers incorporated elements of American FM systems into their own post-war tank radios, favoring clarity and reliability over the German designs that had failed so completely. Production and deployment statistics reveal the magnitude of the American achievement. American Radio SCR 50852858. A units produced 50. Josen plus. Gent. Sherman tanks produced 49. 324. WW2 radio deployment rate 100%. Transmission power 25. Frequency stability. Crystal controlled plus 0. 1%. Range moving 7 miles. Range stationary 10 to 15 miles. German radio Fuge 5. Transceivers produced 6,000. Was a medium heavy tanks. Produced 12,000. Case full transceiver deployment rate 20%. Transmission power 10 watts. And frequency stability variable plus 1%. Range moving 0.51 mile. Once range stationary 2 to 3 miles. Communication effectiveness. Average time for American fire. Mission 3 to 5 minutes. Average time for German fire mission 15 to 30 minutes. American tanks. Achieving coordination 100%. German tanks with full communication 20%. The radio superiority of the Sherman tank laid the foundation for principles that continue to shape armored warfare today. Modern main battle tanks carry advanced communication systems that can trace their technological heritage directly to the SCR-508. Although digital rather than analog, the concept remains unchanged. Every vehicle must be part of a unified, reliable communication network. When the German Bundeswehr was re-established in the 1950s, it made communication capability a top priority. Learning from the hard lessons of the Second World War, every Leopard tank built since then has been equipped with comprehensive, high-performance radio systems. One Bundeswehr training manual summarized this lesson perfectly. The defeat of superior German tanks by inferior American vehicles with superior radios proves that information dominance is more powerful than hardware superiority. The same truth has been demonstrated again and again in modern warfare. During the 1991 Gulf War, coalition forces equipped with advanced communication systems destroyed Iraqi armored units that operated Soviet-designed tanks, which were individually stronger in armor and armament but crippled by poor communication. In 2003, American forces proved once again that a connected, information-driven army could defeat even well-armed adversaries that relied on outdated command systems. The ability to share information faster and more accurately than the enemy became the deciding factor, just as it had been on the battlefields of Europe in 1944. The story of American radio superiority in the Sherman tank is more than a tale of technical innovation. It represents a victory in the invisible realm of the electromagnetic spectrum. This was a triumph that mattered more than the thickness of armor or the size of a gun. German tank crews fought their war partially blind to this revolution. Only when it was too late did they realize that every Sherman tank was not merely a single fighting vehicle, but part of a vast, interconnected system. The SCR-508 radio turned the M4 Sherman from an ordinary medium tank into a component of history's first battlefield network. This networked capability linking every tank, every unit, and every commander proved more decisive than any improvement in armor or firepower could have achieved. Each Sherman carried not only a 75mm cannon and sloped armor, but also 181 pounds of radio equipment that tied it to every other American tank on the battlefield. Together, they formed a collective intelligence that no individual German tank, however advanced, could equal. German forces came to understand this lesson the hard way. From Kasserine Pass to the mountains of Italy, through the hedgerows of France, and into the final battles inside Germany, American tanks operated with a level of coordination that German doctrine considered impossible without visual contact. Yet, The Wehrmacht never developed an effective countermeasure, largely because it never fully understood the scale of the technological divide. At Germany's surrender in 1945, Field Marshal Wilhelm Keitel was reported to have remarked, "We knew how to build better tanks, but you knew how to make them work together." Whether this statement was accurately recorded or not, it captured an undeniable truth. The United States had not simply produced 49 324 Sherman tanks. It had created 49 324 connected elements of a single, coordinated fighting network. Historians often describe the idea of network-centric warfare as a modern military revolution, but its roots reach back to 1914. When the first Sherman tank equipped with an SCR-508 radio entered combat. From that moment on, warfare changed in a fundamental way. Victory no longer depended solely on who had the strongest or fastest weapon. It depended on who could communicate, coordinate, and adapt in real time. The side with superior communication would defeat the side with superior machines. The network would triumph over the platform. The connected would always overcome the isolated. This transformation unfolded quietly, almost invisibly, before the eyes of the German High Command. They observed American tactical coordination, but failed to recognize the technology that made it possible until it was too late. By the time German commanders understood that every Sherman tank possessed communication abilities their own forces lacked, the war's outcome had already been decided. The German military's failure to recognize and respond to America's communication superiority remains one of the great intelligence oversights of World War II. Despite repeated encounters that revealed how effectively American forces coordinated across the battlefield, German leadership never treated their communication deficiencies as a priority. They continued producing tanks with exceptional engineering machines that were powerful, well-armored, and deadly in one-on-one combat, but these tanks often fought as isolated individuals. Meanwhile, American forces operated vehicles that were, in many ways, less sophisticated, yet functioned as parts of a larger, synchronized system. In the end, it was not armor thickness or gun caliber that defined victory, but the invisible power of communication. The electromagnetic waves transmitted by the SCR-508 radios proved more decisive than the armor-piercing shells fired from the German 88mm guns. The Americans could coordinate instantly, share information across vast distances, and respond as a single, unified force. This capability, unseen but ever present, was the true weapon that reshaped the outcome of modern warfare. The Sherman tank's radio network gave American crews a collective awareness that German units lacked. Every movement, every adjustment, every order could be shared in real time. This unity transformed American armored warfare from a series of isolated duels into a coordinated effort where tanks, infantry, and artillery moved together with precision. The Germans, though technically skilled, were bound by their communication limits. Their tanks often fought alone, unable to call for help or coordinate with nearby units. The result was a pattern repeated across countless battlefields, superior German machines falling to well-coordinated American teams. By the war's end, one lesson had become unmistakable. The side that could connect its forces would triumph over the side that fought in isolation. The Sherman's radio superiority had changed not only the course of battles, but the nature of warfare itself. It established a principle that continues to shape military doctrine to this day in modern combat. Connection means survival, and isolation means defeat. Across North Africa, Italy, France, and the final battlegrounds of Germany, this truth became clear. German troops discovered too late that their opponents possessed not just greater numbers, but an invisible edge in technology, an advantage that allowed American forces to think, move, and fight as one. It was not the size of the tank that decided the future of warfare, but the strength of the signal that bound them together